Welcome back to the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI and the Kansas City Sports Network. My name is Killian Wright, joined as always by Zach Knox-Doyle. And we have had a lot of news in the last week since our last podcast, ranging from NBA stuff to NFL stuff to some Mizzou basketball. And then we'll get into our main segment here around the halfway point of our Mizzou football depth chart, looking at the defensive side this time. We'll go ahead and kick it off with some of the NFL news. Relevant to our KC Sports Network stuff, former Mizzou linebacker Nick Bolton is set to be inducted into the Mizzou Athletics Hall of Fame, class of 2026. Had a really good career at Mizzou. I was a Butkus finalist, two-time All-SEC, I believe one time on the All-American nominee. Obviously has had a really, I guess, for lack of a better word, he's had a big time in the spotlight in his NFL career. I mean, being with the Chiefs will do that for you. He's stuck with them the whole time. I was part of those two Super Bowl teams, had some pretty memorable plays against the Eagles. He's kind of been one of those main Mizzou representatives in the NFL because he was part of that early bunch. He overlapped with Drinkwitz for a year, but really you could say he kind of came before this big wave of now the Mizzou guys getting to the NFL kind of regularly, of like the Trotters, the Zions, the Membus, the Cooks, the Burdens. Bolton was a little bit ahead of that crew. And so he kind of pioneered Mizzou in the NFL for a little bit, but now you're starting to see guys join him. I think that's pretty cool. I think that's probably part of the reason why he got into the Mizzou Athletics Hall of Fame, on top of just obviously his career with Mizzou and then his pro career being notable. Anyway, some other news. The NBA draft happened. There was no Mizzou player drafted directly out of Mizzou. There was Trayvon Brazile, who spent 1 year at Mizzou with Quanzo Martin before going to Arkansas. And so there's some Tiger representation there. Whether you fans want to claim him or not, I won't blame you anyway. But although there was no Mizzou players drafted, two did sign deals in the days following the draft. Mark Mitchell signed an Exhibit 10 contract with Denver, which is basically a non-guaranteed 1 year deal where he can be with the team throughout training camp and summer league. If he performs well, maybe they'll offer him a two-way contract. If not, he'll probably stick around either in their G League or another league. And then Sean Phillips Jr., definitely the more unexpected of the two, signed a summer league contract with New Orleans. With Sean Phillips, it's interesting because he was part of that group who was filing a lawsuit against the NCAA to get an extra year of eligibility. And then a couple days later, he signed with the New Orleans Pelicans. So two interesting signings there. Zach, I know you're a big NBA guy. Kind of thoughts on Mitchell, Phillips? Do those spots make sense for them? I know it's just summer league for Phillips, but do those spots make sense for Mitchell and Phillips? What do you think about them as potential NBA prospects?
I mean, starting with Phillips, I think there is a world where he can kind of muster his way into like a backup role. You're starting to see, I feel like there was a pretty significant dip for about maybe going from like 2020 to 2024 of that old-time big man that just kind of bullies his way in. But I feel like that's getting a slight resurgence lately. You see Jalen Duren, guys like that. So there is a world where I think Sean Phillips could fit in a rotational spot. I mean, we saw how strong he was at Mizzou. He has a demeanor that I think fits the NBA really well. Obviously, some trash talking. I think that goes well in the NBA, to be honest with you. And I don't hate that. And more importantly, I do see Mark Mitchell having a career in the NBA, especially because we saw at the end of the season, he started developing a three-point shot. In the last 20 games of the season, he went 16 for 32 from three, which is 50%. Obviously, that's a little bit less than one make per game, but that's still pretty impressive for a guy that shot about 25% the year before. So if he can develop that, I think Mitchell could be a guy that obviously he's explosive. He's fast for his size. He's pretty muscular, can get inside, bully his way in. But if he can develop this shot and he also became a better playmaker at the end of the year, I think he could be an all-around great player for the Nuggets. We're seeing possibly some rumors about the Nuggets with maybe getting rid of Jamal Murray, exploring a new future. I think Mark Mitchell could be a part of that. It was a really solid pickup from Denver. And interesting to see that pipeline from Mizzou to Denver again.
Yeah, I'm definitely not surprised with Mitchell getting an Exhibit 10 contract. I think I wouldn't have even been totally shocked if he had just straight up got a two-way contract. So I do think there's a chance he maybe gets a two-way contract in Denver. Obviously, they got a spot open now Tamar Bates was on a two-way contract with Denver the past season. He is no longer on that contract. He's now with the Utah Jazz, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, I do think Mark Mitchell, there's a world where he turns into an NBA player. Not a very high ceiling. He needs that jumper to come around to even have a chance in the league, to be totally honest. It looked nice in the last 20 games through conference play, but it was on a really low volume. You got to be a somewhat respectable shooter if you're not going to be a traditional center in the NBA, which obviously Mark Mitchell is not a traditional center. He's not even a center. He's a forward who is not going to be your primary rim protector. That is fine. He's got pretty high feel. I would say was a really good passer in his last year with Mizzou. A pretty good decision maker as well. You saw that develop over time, and then had a really high free throw rate, was really good at getting to the rim, and was a really good driver. So there's strengths to his game. I think he's a guy who could look really good in Summer League because he's used to being the best player on the floor, and he could step up as one of the better players on the floor for Denver in Summer League. And so if he's got a high usage role, he could do it. Scaling down to that lower usage role is going to be what really determines his future NBA success. But as far as Summer League, he's definitely a guy to watch. If he performs well, look for him to potentially get a two-way. If not, I'm sure he'll be in the G League, either with Denver or another organization. About Tamar Bates, though, signing with the Jazz last year, even though he was on the two-way contract with Denver, he never actually played for the main roster. He dealt with some injuries throughout the year. I believe it was a shoulder injury that had sidelined him for a little bit. But nonetheless, he had just played, it wasn't a shoulder injury. It was a left foot injury. Good thing I checked. He had only played with the Grand Rapids Gold, didn't quite get that crack at the NBA. Zach, in Utah, do you think Bates has a better chance of maybe finding his way to an NBA role?
Oh, for sure. I think obviously you look at those two teams over the last few years, and Denver has been miles better. Utah was one of the worst teams in the league for the last few years. So I think there's certainly a possibility that he could get in there, although their guard depth is a little bit better than it was in the past. But he's just a spark plug shooter. He had strong averages in college from the free throw line, really, which is absolutely spectacular. He shot like over 92% in his last 2 years from the free throw line, which I think is useful in the NBA. You do want to put a guy in that's, if he gets to the line, he's going to knock down his shots, but he also can knock down the triple. He's just a good bench player in the NBA without a doubt, and Utah's really a good place for him to start.
Yeah, I agree. If Utah's kind of on that lower echelon of teams again, which probably will be, I'm not imagining them to be great next year. There's definitely avenues for Bates to get playing time, especially if he's on that two-way and healthy again for the year. I would be pretty surprised if Bates doesn't make his NBA debut at some point, should he remain on the roster. And yeah, there's some better guard depth there. Kansas guard Darren Peterson, obviously, headed over there in the NBA draft. And then you've got some other backup options. I know they're keeping Blake Henson around. Another KU guy, Sviatsu Mikhailuk, is going to come back. And so there's some guys there for Bates to worry about. But overall, I think he could play. And maybe this is the start of what could be a somewhat of quality NBA career for Bates. But obviously really early in the offseason, we'll see if he's even still with Utah. We'll see how he does in Summer League. So for Summer League, definitely keep an eye on Bates, Mitchell, and Phillips. And then some other guys that could be on Summer League rosters. Look around for Sean East. Look around for maybe Caleb Grill coming back. But yeah, keep an eye out for these Mizzou guys in Summer League. See if any of them make their real chance. Sticking with Mizzou basketball, the current season, the upcoming season, added 2 games to the schedule per reports. These aren't confirmed yet, but per reports, they added Evansville and Alcorn State as home games to the schedule. They played Alcorn once in 2012 and once in 1981, and they played Evansville once in 1989 and then again in 2006. Those are the only 2. Well, here's how the schedule's panning out right now. Per reports, you've got Evansville, Alcorn State, Nebraska, St. Louis, Marquette, Pittsburgh, Kansas, Illinois, and then Howard is expected to be played to wrap up that final of the 3-game series, but not confirmed for Howard either yet. So as the schedule currently stands, there's 4 slots in the non-con open. They could all be bye games, which would be more indicative of how the last season's schedule went. Or they could, maybe they'll sneak in one more legitimate game against a more respectable opponent. Zach, kind of what do you think these two games indicate for Mizzou's schedule, and what do you think about the matchup?
Well, I think the schedule, like you said, or I don't know if you said it, but I think we've talked about it, that the schedule is already a lot stronger. I think the non-conference is a lot stronger than it was last year. You have Kansas and Illinois, again, like you said, but you have more than just Minnesota and Notre Dame. You've got Nebraska, you've got St. Louis, Marquette, Pittsburgh. So you've got a lot more big names in there. So I wouldn't necessarily expect them to fill another spot with a team from the Power Five, but if they do, that'd be great. But looking at these two teams, a little fun fact about Evansville, because I'm from Bloomington Normal, Illinois, so I've seen Evansville quite a lot against Illinois State. And to be honest, they've been the laughingstock of the Missouri Valley for the last really as long as I can remember. They haven't had a winning season since 2018. And somehow ISU usually loses to them, but we don't need to get into that. But I still think the Missouri Valley should be a conference that should be more respected. There is a lot of very solid basketball, some great players that come from the Missouri Valley. If you guys remember, Antonio Reeves played for Kentucky about 4 years ago. He went to ISU. There's a lot of big names. St. Louis's star last year came from the Missouri Valley as well. So it's a really respected conference. Evansville, not quite as much. Still a decent addition there. And then Alcorn State, they're usually a pretty strong team in the SWAC. Had a down year last year, but I was pretty happy about that addition as well. Just more overall, though, looking at the schedule, I'm really happy that Mizzou went with this harder non-conference schedule so they can get into some tougher games before you really get into SEC play, which is going to be obviously much more difficult.
Yeah, we saw a lot of SWAC on the non-con schedule last year, at least for keeping one team around from it. I'd be heartbroken if we didn't have at least some sentiment of the SWAC still in the schedule. So I guess I'm glad Alcorn State's there. But yeah, I think you could probably fill out the rest with bye games and be fine with it. I think this non-con schedule is enough to make your point in the expanded NCAA tournament. Like Gates emphasized he wanted to do, this schedule is far more competitive. There is far more legitimate challenges to prepare yourself for conference play so you don't potentially get hit like a truck when that time does come. But it's no longer just pure ramp up and preparation for conference play. Obviously, conference play is going to be the priority and the more important half of the season, but non-con is no longer just walkthrough. This is real. These games do matter. Your score in these games matter now. These will have an effect on potential NCAA tournaments, seedings, bids, whatnot. And there are now benchmarks that they can set for themselves. Okay, we beat Nebraska. How do we look against Kansas? Okay, St. Louis, how do we look against Pittsburgh? There's multiple teams now instead of just because, I mean, Minnesota wasn't really a challenge. That was not a good team. You really only had 3 opportunities to truly test yourself last year. If you want to say Howard on the road season opener, sure. But in all honesty, you had 3 real tests last year in Kansas and Illinois and Notre Dame, and 2 of those are neutral sites against longtime rivals. So now you've got a little more juice to kind of feel yourself out before conference play starts. Any kind of closing thoughts on Mizzou's schedule?
I'm happy that we've added a Missouri. That's a lot of sentiment to me, and I do think the Missouri Valley is an undervalued conference. I think it's still definitely, like you said, like a bye game, but I think that it's a decent addition. Getting some more conferences. There was a lot of SWAC last year, so it's good we at least still have one team from the SWAC, but definitely mixing it up. Mizzou is this year with their schedule, getting a lot of practice against a lot of different kind of teams, and you have to do that to prepare for SEC schedule. And then if you're planning on getting to March Madness, you want to be prepared against all these different conferences, because it is true, some conferences play different than others, so different physicality, different mentalities, stuff like that. So I'm pretty impressed with the schedule that they've compiled so far.
Yeah, and even with some of those bye games, obviously it'll still be helpful. You can maybe see you'll feel a little more comfortable playing Aaron Rowe, Nicholas Randall, Aiden Chronister, heavier minutes against teams like that, which is going to be important. Those 3 guys I just said as examples because they're some of the youngest guys on the team. Maybe those 3 will be regular contributors in conference play. But assuming they're not, this is a good opportunity to get those guys burned and maybe see if they are. If they're not, see where they are in regards to a long-term timeline. Hey, how close do we think these guys are to being able to be regular contributors? What do they need to work on? How does Aiden Chronister's handle look in 12 minutes versus a SWAC team versus in 2 minutes versus Nebraska? What's the difference there? What can he improve on? So I think those are going to be fun opportunities to maybe see what some of these younger guys who might be more future based plans than immediate plans could look like as we see the rest of the schedule potentially fill out with these non-con games. And again, these games against Evansville and Alcorn are not confirmed. They're not on, as of last night, they were not on the team schedule on the website or anything, but they have been reported by various outlets. So assuming those get added, you've got stuff to work with there. And at the end of the day, I do think it's good for them. It'll be a lot more entertaining. There was a stretch last year where it felt like watching these Mizzou non-con games was like watching the same game over and over, and the team wasn't really learning anything about itself. It felt like for some time it was just kind of waiting and lingering. Oh, we'll shift Jacob Cruz in and out. We'll shift Sebastian Mack in and out. But those changes were happening. I believe the Sebastian Mack change came against Notre Dame. So it took playing against a real opponent to realize, hey, this lineup change isn't for us, or this starting lineup isn't for us. You can figure that out a little easier now that you've got more of these benchmarks going around. And I think that's important. So that way they can discover themselves earlier on. Going into the conference schedule, I believe their opponent was also revealed. I think they're going to be playing Tennessee twice this year, so that's of note. But the rest of the schedule will fill itself out here in the coming weeks. Zach, is there anyone that you maybe have your eye on in those non-con games that could potentially be against the rest of the bye games that you think they should be looking at? Development traits, anything like that?
So like the team that I'm looking out for the most?
No, like players on Mizzou that you think maybe in these bye games is worth keeping an eye on so that you still get value out of watching these games like Evansville and Alcorn, while they may not be, but are projected to be blowouts.
For sure. I think Aiden Chronister is a huge name. You brought it up. I think that's a guy that could possibly end up getting into the rotation come SEC play. The rotation as in maybe 5 to 10 minutes. I think that he has to prove himself in these non-conference games, and those are opportunities where you can give him, like you said, 12, 15 minutes, see how he does with that. And I think, he's a 4-star. He's a guy that is a little bit unproven. I think we've maybe gotten a little spoiled with how great this recruiting class has been, but Aiden Chronister is still an excellent ball player. And these non-conference games are going to be games where he could prove himself to work his way into a rotation.
Absolutely. I think the shot is probably going to be there no matter what. But I think in the case of Chronister, you could be looking more for the handle, the athleticism, the how does he run in transition, the how does he deal in pick and roll defense, the switching. I think that's all things that you could potentially look for in situations like these and to highlight and see what he's going for. I think it's also will be interesting to see Aaron Rowe because some of these teams may be smaller, a little bit more on his physical level, and you can see where he's going and see his trajectory and see, okay, we didn't get to see him at all last year. Let's see how he looks against Evansville, against Howard, against Alcorn, against whoever else is going to be in this bye slate. And then we'll see, okay, he's looked really good against them. Let's see how he levels up against Pittsburgh, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, Aaron Rowe, Aiden Chronister, I think are definitely two interesting guys to watch there in that non-con schedule. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and get into some football talk. We're going to go over the defense depth chart. We did our offense last week. But before that, we're going to go ahead and throw it to break, and we'll be right back.
With Yuka Boom Color Bar, what we're offering is luxury color services, but we're doing it on our client schedules. Didn't want to feel like or be a traditional salon. We wanted it to really feel like something completely different, especially for the Kansas City area. What we were trying to do is trying to find a brick and mortar that we could put a salon in. And it got complicated. And so what we ended up doing was pivoting, and we went into like a business acquisition mode where we were going to find a hair salon and then we were going to turn it into what we wanted to do. And Emprise was 100% behind that.
Like, we didn't just have a contact. We had a team, and they cared, and
We never sat in limbo at all with Emprise. They pushed us through, they helped us, support us. And not only that, but they've been our biggest cheerleaders since the day one.
everybody who wanted our money, it was very difficult. It was very challenging part of it. But the people who were giving us the money, Emprise Bank, that was the easiest part. So we will always be grateful to Emprise.
I'm Cricket,
I'm JC.
and together we're the owners of Hue Kaboom Color Bar.
Come see us at Park Place.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
All right, welcome back to the All Things Mizzou podcast. We are going to go ahead and get into our Mizzou football defensive depth chart predictions. As I said last week, we did our offense. Me and Zach had pretty much the same starting predictions, with the one discrepancy being at left guard. I thought Zach Owens would start there. Zach thinks Tristan Wilson would start there. I would imagine our defensive depth charts, me and Zach talk a lot, so I think we're going to have a lot of similarities here, but I do think we're going to have one or two differences, potentially at those edge spots, potentially at corner 2, potentially at safety 2. I think there's some spots for differences here. I think we're going to go ahead and begin with the edge rushers. Zach, who do you have helming the edge row?
I think we might get a difference here. Let's see. I have Darius Smith as one of the starters, and the other one, I spent a lot of time thinking on this. I'm going with Tamar and Morgan here. I think that there's a lot of raw talent here. It's the most challenging group for me to see where we're at. I think it's going to be the most challenging group for Missouri to figure out what their rotation is going to look like. But at the end of the day, I love his size at 6'5", 251. He put on 20 pounds last year. He could even put on some more weight. With Darius Smith being 240, you might want Kamara Morgan a little bit more bulky than 251. He can certainly do that. He played 125 snaps as a freshman. He's got great size, great athleticism, and I think the most upside in this team. So I have him in my starters. Then rotational players, Dayton Hopkins, another guy with huge upside, 4-star. He was a top 25 edge. He played in 4 games last year, was incredible against Mississippi State. I think he'll continue that this year. And Langdon Kitchen, of course, that's a guy that a lot of people have projected to start. I think there's certainly a possibility, but I just love the upside a lot more in Morgan. And I'd even start Hopkins over him too.
Yeah. This edge room, I think you and me both, we could talk all day about it. Like from top to bottom, I think it's the most interesting position group on the team because there are so many guys. Like I think there are really like 7 guys you can make an argument for starting, and it'd be like, I would hear someone out if they wanted to make that argument. There's so much talent. There's a lot of unproven and raw talent that hasn't necessarily turned into production yet, which makes it so hard to predict. Is you're really going based off this raw talent and thinking, how does it fit with Missouri? How does it fit alongside Darius Smith? Because I do think Darius Smith is the one guy that everyone agrees will be starting at edge. Like undoubtedly Darius Smith will be a starting edge. I would be shocked if he's not starting in week 1. So I do share that with you. My second starter, I went with Langdon Kitchen. And I think because of the experience within the scheme last year, and I also would like to clarify, I think Langdon Kitchen starts. I don't know if that means he plays starter level snaps. Jalen Catalon started a lot of games last year. You don't have to be the starter to play the most snaps. I think Kitchen is one of the better run defenders of the group. I think he's pretty consistent. I think he surprised people last year with how well he played. I think he is worth a spot in the rotation at the very least. And I think that kind of gives him a niche in the sense of he might not be the most explosive guy, the most athletically challenging guy. But I think he's kind of carved a niche as a pretty solid run defender. And I think you can keep him at the very least in the rotation. And then as my top backups, I had Kamara Morgan and Malik Bryant from Miami. So 2 transfers I went with there. Dayton Hopkins, I have right there. Drink spoke very highly of him. At one point, I had Dayton Hopkins as my starter. I think Dayton Hopkins could start later in the season. I would not be shocked at all if it's week 6 and Dayton Hopkins is your second starter. Same goes for Morgan. Same goes for Bryant. I wouldn't be overly shocked at that. CJ May, I wouldn't be shocked at him working himself into the rotation. Starting, probably not, but working into the rotation, I could see it. There's a lot of talent here at all these positions. I think Morgan, like you said, really impressive as a prospect. Played a little bit last year in his freshman year. 4-star prospect, 4-star transfer. I think he's got kind of the resume to make a case for that starting thing. And I think he could push for it. I think after the first couple of weeks, you could certainly see Morgan or Hopkins do it. And then Bryant, I know people at Miami spoke highly of him, believed he would have played a lot more had he not been on a team as stacked as Miami in that edge room with Ruben Bain over there. So I do think Malik Bryant could maybe be a guy that pans out. And he is a little bit older. He's got that hand and experience. So there's a chance there. Maybe he's just already higher in the depth chart because of that experience. So I think there's something to look at there with Malik Bryant. I think he'll certainly see snaps. But Zach, I don't know if you agree with this. Let me know here in a second. I think the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, and potentially even longer, we're going to see a lot of rotation and shuffling in that edge room. It's not going to be, hey, Damon Wilson, Zion Young, you're out there the majority of the time, and then we'll filter in Darius and Langdon when we can, and then sprinkle in a little bit of Dayton Hopkins in these easier games. I think it's going to be much more of a rotation. But Zach, let me know your thoughts on that.
I agree with that. I think there's going to be probably a misconception that there isn't a lot of talent in this room, just because there isn't necessarily that top end talent that there was last year. But like we've said, there is so many guys that are super young, like Dayton Hopkins, redshirt freshman, Kamara Morgan, he's going to be a sophomore. Like, these are guys that are really young, unproven. Darius Smith is a redshirt senior, which is why I think when you have that blend, I think that's really great for your positional group, not only because you're going to have these guys be able to kind of coach the other ones, help them out, stuff like that. But also I think you just have a little bit more dependability, but you still have the availability for high upside in Morgan, in Hopkins, guys like that. So I really like this room. It's going to be interesting. And I think because of that, we are going to see a lot of rotation switches in the first 4 to 5 weeks. I would like it to get hashed out by Ben, because once you get into SEC play, you are going to want this edge rusher room to be polished and ready to go. But just those first few weeks against some weaker opponents and be able to hash that out without a doubt.
And I do think they'll be able to hash it out. And I would also make the point that, like, maybe, I don't know, maybe Kamar and Morgan kind of wins out a job this year by like week 5, and he looks better than Dayton Hopkins through the first 5 weeks. That might not necessarily mean the same case in 2027. There'll be another battle, or maybe both those guys are starting by that point. I don't know. But there's a lot of guys in here who I think there'll be a lot of rotating, a lot of shuffling. This group, although obviously this is depth chart predictions, so we're naming starters, this is the least starter, I feel. Aside, I think Darius Smith will play a significant more amount of snaps. These rest of these guys, you could tell me they're all going to play. You could tell me there's 4 guys who are going to play within 20 snaps of each other through week 5, and I'd believe it. So
we didn't
I think
say Jaden Jones.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot going on here. Like, there's so many guys to mention. Jaden Jones has just as well of a case as a Malik Bryant does to potentially make a run at that starting job. Like, there's so much going on. And then another guy I didn't mention, 6'8" DeMarcus Johnson from JUCO. That's got it. You can't just not use that, right? That's a really freak athlete. You got to figure out how to get on the field somehow. Luckily, you've got a lot of snaps against Troy and Pine Bluff, and potentially, depending on how it goes, Kansas to figure that out if you can run up the score in that one early. But there's so many guys that it's like you got to find ways to get these guys on the field. And these younger guys, they've got a little more time, so maybe they're okay. Not necessarily. Maybe Mizzou's going to be all right, not launching them into these higher roles, and they'll maybe lean more toward that Smith, Bryant, Kitchen, Jones crowd because they've got a little less time. But I mean, obviously, you just play the best players. So, like you said, yeah, Jaden Jones, Demarcus Johnson. Then you mentioned those guys, CJ May. That brings you to like 8 players that you gotta keep an eye on. There's no one that you can just kind of pencil off, be like, oh, they won't really do anything this year. We could be totally wrong about these guys. Maybe Jaden Jones ends up starting. I don't know. We could be totally wrong about these guys. I'll move on from the edge rooms. We're spending a lot of time on that. I think we've got our point across that there's a lot of talent that's hard to project in there. Moving on to the defensive tackle room, I'll start with my starters. I've got Marquise Gracial and Jalen Marshall. I think these are 2 pretty easy to predict spots. I think Marquise and Jalen were the 3rd and 4th leading snap guys last year. They were very, very clearly on that, especially Marquise was heavy in the rotation. That was a thing of his, is maybe getting in more shape to play more snaps, more downs, and he's really progressed over his time in Mizzou. Drinkwitz spoke really highly of him in one of the earlier season pressers last year, talking about his development and journey. And I think Marquise is definitely ready at this point to kind of step up into that starting role now that Chris McClellan and Sterling Webb are gone. And then Jalen Marshall as well, I think will kind of step up in that DT2 spot. As far as the backups, Dante Simpson from Miami. So I'm going with another Miami guy. I do think he's ready to kind of take up another role. I believe it was Ahmad Hardy who said in one of the spring pressers, we asked who is sticking out, and he's like, that guy from Miami, Dante, is always in the weight room. So making an early impression. I know he's a 3-star, a younger guy. I think he could potentially climb up there. And then Jason Dowell, who's a really interesting athlete, again, on the younger side. But I think he's kind of got the makings of a rotational guy who can see the field a little more this year, about 6'3", 306 pounds. I think those 2 can climb up. I think the top of the D-tackle room is pretty reasonable to expect Marquise and Jalen Marshall as the starters, but then the bottom between Elias Williams, although he's dealing with the leg injury, but Elias Williams, and then you've got Sam Williams, you've got Taj Overton. There's a lot, and then you got freshmen like Jacquez Felix in there. There's a lot going on in the D-tackle room to keep an eye on. But yeah, Zach, who do you got for your starters?
Yeah, I think the starters are very set in stone. I have the same Marquise Gracial and also Jalen Marshall. I think this is one of the strongest starters. I don't necessarily think it's the best group for depth, but starters wise, it was one of my top ones. I mean, Marquise Gracial, looking at his defense grades, like on PFF, like he ranked 41st of 913 players last year. He ranked 16th in run defense. So this guy's a monster. 6'4", 322. I think he'll be a catalyst for this defense. You got Jalen Marshall. He played in every single game last year. He even made a start, had 17 tackles, great size. He's been committed to this program just like Gracial. They've been here for so long. I just think that they've worked together for so long. It's really a good story. I mean, they're both redshirt seniors, so this will be their 5th year in the program, I believe, which is really rare to have 2 guys that are going to be starting alongside each other that have been through the program for that long. And that's a great thing to see in those 2. And then rotational players, I had Dante Simpson as he was kind of my clear-cut number 1. Sophomore transfer from Miami, 6'3", 300. He played in 8 games as a freshman on a really good Miami team. So he was also like the number 33 ranked defensive lineman out of high school per Rivals. And then a guy you didn't mention, I think Mark Hensley could maybe get some reps. 6'3", 290 from Northern Illinois. He had 32 tackles last year. Used to be teammates with Santana Banner, so maybe a little bit of friendship winning out there. But I do think he's a great player. He could definitely see some snaps this year. But like I said, I really expect most of them to go to the starters in Gracial and Marshall, and then the leftovers for Simpson. I don't see a whole lot of rotational shifting like we just talked about in that last group.
Yeah, I think there will be rotational shifting to an extent because of the stamina. These are big guys going in the trenches all day. If you can, you'll rotate these guys, especially with Marquise. Obviously, like you mentioned, when he's on the field, he's awesome. It's more of how long can we keep Marquise on the field consistently? And I do think that I think they've known for a while now that he was going to be one of their starters this year. And so I think he's probably been prepared for that, and it'll work out. And now you can have Marquise starting, and there is preparation there. So I think that works. And then Dante Simpson, I agree, as one of the better backups. He will probably be playing pretty regular snaps. I could see him getting his way onto the field a lot. And then, going through the rest of the chart, Mark Hensley, I could kind of see that. It would be a little surprising to me, but obviously that happens. Like Langdon Kitchen kind of playing up to the way he did last year. I didn't necessarily expect that heading into the season, but it could happen. And then Elias Williams, I think, is an interesting guy, but he will be coming off that leg injury. And then Taj Overton as a freshman, he's one of the guys that we went through earlier on the podcast and had talked about potentially being a freshman that could see playing time really early on because he is a 4-star, really talented. And it's kind of anyone's game in that back half of the defensive tackle room. So you could see Taj Overton in this freshman year play some real snaps in conference play. And I think that's a possibility. But yeah, I think we're in agreement there that we've got the same top three in Marquise Gracial, Jalen Marshall, and Dante Simpson. And those are probably, as of now, probably your pillars in the D tackle room for the 2026 season. And it's cool that Simpson is going to be doing that so young because you could see the path to him starting very clearly in the coming years. Moving on to our linebacker group. The linebacker group was pretty good for Mizzou last year, obviously helmed by Josiah Trotter. And then Nick Rodriguez was a big part of that. He'll be back. But then also Tristan Newson and Khalil Jacobs, who found places in the NFL through minicamp and UDFA deals. So Trotter, Jacobs, and Newson are out. It's kind of a new look room. Zach, who do you got helming it?
It's a new look room, but in my opinion, I think it's the strongest defensive room out of all of them. You have Junior Nicholas Rodriguez starting for me and Robert Woodyard. Rodriguez played 13 games, 3 starts. He had 61 tackles last year, which was second on the team. Sometimes you talk about how some guys that aren't necessarily starting got so many snaps. Rodriguez is one of those guys. He got 353 snaps, also ranked first in the team with 7 pass breakups. He was, according to PFF, top 65 in run defense, 44th overall defensive grade, just an absolute beast in all facets of the game. And then Woodyard, he played 12 games, 11 starts with Auburn last year. He had 67 tackles. So these are guys that have gotten so many snaps and they've been really successful. He had 50 tackles in SEC play alone. So he got better when he went and played against these more established players. He also has great PFF grades. He was first team all SEC, according to like the PFF's grading, and phenomenal run defense grade, even better than Rodriguez. So these guys are going to be incredible at stopping the run. They're my 2 starters. Rotational pieces. Jeremiah Beasley's my first. He went to Michigan, then transferred to Mizzou for his sophomore season last year. Played in every game, had 19 tackles, forced a fumble, already was a solid backup. He'll get a little bit more snaps this year. And I also had Dante McClellan as my other one, sophomore linebacker, played in 12 games last year. He had that pick 6 in the first game of the year. Another highlight for him, hurried Bama's Ty Simpson. So I think this guy, he's had some big snaps and some bigger games. Won't necessarily see as much action, but I am just very pleased with this group overall.
Yeah, I think this is the group that I would say I have the least questions, worries, concerns about on the defense. No part of me sees, and I have the same starters, Nick Rodriguez, Robert Woodyard. No part of me sees that and is worried in the slightest, like, oh, I wonder how they'll hold up against X competition. I'm not particularly worried. There's plenty of other things to get to before you address any sort of concern with the linebacker room, in my opinion. Nick Rodriguez and Robert Woodyard will be really good at holding down the fort. Rodriguez, you could see it at times last year and toward the end of last season. He was really emerging as kind of a vocal leader on the team, despite being in the younger side, and then was named one of the spring captains. If I had to guess, that will probably translate. He'll probably be a captain for the regular season, but no guarantees, obviously. So having not only the statistical and the proven security, but then also the vocal leadership, obviously really important for the linebacker room. I think you got to feel really great about having Rodriguez be that guy, and then also having an experienced guy like Woodyard come in and be his partner in crime. Those guys are both real strong, obviously. And then as my backups, I've also got Jeremiah Beasley there. Played a lot last year. I think is ready. Clearly, linebacker is also a spot that a lot of guys are going to see action in between last year with the four of Jacobs, Trotter, Newsome, and Rodriguez, and then also a little bit of Beasley in there. Assuming Beasley plays a lot, I think he's that next guy up. And then for that last spot, I think there's a couple different routes you could have gone. If Dante McClellan takes a big leap, could certainly be him. Obviously, he had his moments last year of looking pretty good. Brian Huff is another guy who's kind of been waiting in the shadows for a long time, waiting for that opportunity. This could be it. We could see Brian Huff finally spring into that rotational role. And then another guy like Bobby Washington could maybe do that. I'm kind of sticking on the path of these Miami guys potentially doing something. I think they're on a good team for a good reason. None of these guys played a whole lot, but obviously there was a lot of talent ahead of them. I think Bobby Washington could be really good and in a smaller rotational role. I think maybe he just didn't play much at Miami, and he could be that fourth, fifth guy in the linebacker room. So I think he's a safe pick given the veteran experience, given he was on a good team for being that. But I could very well see maybe Dante McClellan or Brian Huff taking that spot from him a couple weeks into the season. But if I were to predict for week one, I think Bobby Washington might start the season off a little more hope, but we'll see how those games go against Troy, Pine Bluff, to see who are these youngsters making the most of these snaps against teams like that, and see who moves forward with it. But again, I think we're in agreement that top of the linebacker room is real strong.
Yeah, without a doubt. And Bobby Washington was my last guy off the list. I went back and forth with him, McClellan, but I think McClellan has less experience, but more experience in the system. And maybe even, it's close to the same amount of playing time, just because Washington didn't get many looks at Miami. He had been just minimally used for 3 years. And really that probably has nothing to do with him and just the insane depth that the Hurricanes had. But I went with McClellan for those reasons.
All right. Well, moving on then, we're going to go ahead and get to the boundary cornerbacks. We'll address the star position after that. But for the boundary cornerbacks, I think CV1 here is really obvious. Probably the easiest spot to predict on the entire defense here, with Chris Graves being the cornerback one. Ole Miss transfer, really strong, by far the most experienced in the entire group, having started for Ole Miss last season. He's going to start at corner one for the Tigers next season. None of these other guys have real starting experience in recent years. Deloach started 2 years ago, but then didn't start last year. And so I think Graves is just kind of the de facto option. Not amazing last year. He had his issues, obviously. The pass coverage grade at Ole Miss last season was a 65. He allowed 18 catches on 35 targets, but just under 300 yards. But he's also never allowed a touchdown in his career. And so you got to view that as a positive. Obviously, if he's going to be a bend, don't break, that is perfectly fine. And so Graves being your CB1 to kind of shadow these guys along in the SEC, I think that's a pretty strong spot right there. And I don't have many questions about that. Every other position I've got some questions about. I think I'm going to roll with, and I'm going to make a last second change here, actually. I think Deloach could win that starting spot back. I think it's valuable having done it before. And it wasn't perfect. And obviously last year he got demoted again for Stephen Hall, and he wasn't in that starting spot. But Stephen Hall also wasn't great last season. Between the three of Norwood, Pride, and Hall, yeah, he was the worst. He probably struggled the most, had the most woes. So it's not exactly like Hall was perfect, but in the 2024 season, Deloach was serviceable. He can play. 17 receptions on 30 targets, about 150 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, but 4 pass breakups, no penalties. I think he can start at boundary, and especially if he's got some time to maybe catch his groove through those first couple of weeks. And then again, through week 4, week 5, if you really have to. Like Toriano Pride didn't really catch his stride, it felt like, until the halfway point of last season. So these corners, sometimes they can take a little bit of time. I think Deloach is probably worth giving the second spot to. And then as my top backups, I've got the Oregon guys. I've got Laule and Florence. Sione Laule and Jaleel Florence. Florence, who once played at a pretty high level with Oregon, but has spent the last few years getting derailed by injuries. And then Laule, who has just kind of been lower on the depth chart on a pretty loaded Oregon team, and is now making his way to Missouri, where he's definitely got a chance to get one of those starting spots. I think that second boundary corner spot is totally up in the air. But Laule could be one of them. I've got him as my backup, though. So I've got Graves, Deloach starting, Florence, and Laule as the 2 top backups.
I have Graves as well, and I did put Laule as my other starter. It's kind of funny that you made a last-second change to take Deloach and put him in. I made a last-second change. Well, when I was constructing this list, I originally had Deloach starting, and I went against it because I think the thing that really put me over the edge was I looked and I was like, I hadn't realized it before, but Laule's 6'4", and I think that size is something that is very unique that no one else possesses in this group. Everybody else at 6 foot 6'1", well, at least between like the 4 people that you have mentioned, no one taller than 6'1", and then Laule 6'4". Spent 2 years at Oregon, 2 at San Mateo, so I really like how he's like climbed the ladder. I always love stories like that. And yeah, he didn't have a lot of time in that first year, but second year, 116 snaps with Oregon last year, nothing to scoff at. He got 7 tackles. His pass coverage grade was a 77, which is really strong. Had 2 breakups, and I love the size, the uniqueness that he'll bring to this program. So I put him alongside Graves. I've got Florence and Deloach as my 2 backups. I think both of them have had starter experience before, but it has been quite a while. Florence was a 4-star out of high school. He was a big name. He spent his whole career at Oregon. I mean, he made 9 starts in his sophomore year, but then those derailed him, ended up saying that he was gone mid-season last year at Oregon, ended up going against it just because I think that the ceiling of Laule is higher. And then with Deloach, that was the one I really struggled with. And I just think because last year he wasn't able to really quite take that next step to get in there, even though he had been there before, doesn't really give me a lot of confidence that he'll be able to take that next step this year. And then a couple guys that didn't quite make it, but I think their time will come and they will be key pieces to this program as long as they don't enter the transfer portal. Cameron Keys, Jackson Gates, I think those are 2 guys that you could see get a good amount of snaps in the first few non-conference games just to keep them going. I would think you want to preserve Jackson Gates' redshirt season, but if you play him in 4, give him a good amount of snaps, I think that'd be huge.
Yeah, agree with you on Gates there. I think he's going to be huge in the future. I think Keys could sneak in and get a role this year. I do think this group is relatively equal in terms of where they stand right now. The group of Laule, Florence, Deloach, and Keys. I wouldn't totally be shocked to see Keys heavier or higher in that rotation than maybe Florence, just by chance. I think Keys is a pretty good prospect to have, and he looked all right in limited snaps last year. And so he's maybe worth giving a shot to. I definitely think you're right in the sense that Laule has the higher ceiling than Deloach. I think Deloach just has the scheme familiarity advantage, and you're definitely also right in the sense that it's not exactly promising that he didn't keep his starting job or at least stay as a heavy rotation guy last year, even though Hall was struggling and Deloach had been a starter before. So it's definitely not the most promising sign in the world, and it's something he'd have to bounce back from. That's kind of a weird mental loop, maybe, is starting, then being taken, and then being, all right, go win your job again. Because the CB2 job won't be handed to him, even if he does get it. It's very much going to be a battle. And so that's interesting. You're almost convincing me to just switch back to Laule, to be totally honest, but I don't want to switch too much. So that's like, that one is a true coin toss for me. I think maybe that's a Deloach starts the first 3 games. He's a little more familiar. He's used to it more recently. And then all of a sudden it's like Laule plays a little more and more each week. And you're like, oh, this guy needs to be on the field. And then week 8 comes and it's like, okay, Laule is there and he's CB2. I think that's a pretty likely outcome. And so I guess it kind of blends our predictions together there. But I think Laule is pretty fun and will be an interesting watch throughout most of the year. Moving on to that star position, obviously has been held down by Dalen Carnell for the last few years. He's not here anymore. He is with Pittsburgh in the NFL. There's a couple guys who could play this. Obviously, Santana Banner posted or reposted something the other day that was talking about him potentially being a replacement for Carnell in the star. He like reposted on Twitter. I try not to hold too much value into Twitter. The thing also was talking about a 40 time that he ran in practice, so maybe he cared more about that and didn't care what the bottom part said. I don't know. I'm trying not to value that in my depth chart rankings because I don't want to throw too much factor into Twitter because I don't think Santana Banner does. So if Santana Banner doesn't, I probably shouldn't. But anyway, Zach, who did you have at your star position?
I ended up going with Foston. I think he's a little undersized at 5'11", 183, but he's battle tested in a young career. And by a little undersized, I honestly just mean like a little. It's really not much. He played in 11 games, made 3 starts last year at Auburn. Great pickups from Auburn, by the way. We've been talking a lot about the pickups from Oregon and Miami. So I think they also definitely dipped into Auburn quite a bit as well. Played in 11 games.
Yeah, never forget the 2 weeks that Horatio Fields was on the roster. That Auburn receiver transferred and left before he even got here. Never forget that. So could add another Auburn.
We can count him too. But maybe
analytically, still Horatio Fields.
20 tackles last year from Foston. He had a sack, an interception, 2 pass breakups. I think he's really versatile, which is exactly what you want at the star position, which is why I have him starting, even though he's pretty young, little undersized, but I really, really like what he brings from a versatility standpoint. I also had Jadon Blair. I think he's 6'5", which is very interesting. 205. He was a 4-star, 3rd-ranked safety per on 3 when he came out of high school. Last year, went to Notre Dame, didn't get a whole lot of experience there on the field, but obviously I think the experience that you get from Notre Dame as a whole is probably very valuable. And I love his upside, his unique size. So he got that second spot at me for star.
I'll just say he's not in my depth chart on any of like the top backup spots, but Jadon Blair is awesome. That he's going to be so fun to watch in the future. Freak athlete, like you said, like 6'5", plays in the box, can play on traditional safety too. This guy is going to be like, he's also going to be one of those guys that everyone loves to use in the college football video game. I don't play that, but just like listing out the measurables and the speed and the athleticism and the versatility, like he's probably going to be one of those guys that he's like going to be like the Sean Terry of last year, was like you put Sean Terry in the slot and CFB and he would go nuts. And it's going to be like you put Jadon Blair, your sub linebacker in college football, he's going to go nuts. Jadon Blair is going to be awesome, I think, in like 2-3 years. Regardless, I had Foston, Kensley Luador-Foston, the Auburn transfer, in my star spot. Played a lot of slot last year. I think you can do it again. You can play a little bit in the box, a little bit of that slot corner, a little bit traditional safety if you need to, and a 3 safety thing. So I think Foston is probably a pretty safe pick to hold down the spot there, unless they end up throwing Banner there because of Twitter. I don't think it's going to happen. He could. I also think it's just a little bit of a blend and interchangeable. Sometimes a Banner will undeniably be in the box a lot of time anyway, even if he is the traditional safety. So it really, I don't think matters too much. And then my backup for the star spot, I had CJ Bass. Played a little bit there last year. Maybe was going to leave Mizzou at one point in the offseason. Had some reports that he was entering the transfer portal, and he ended up being back, and he's here. And so I think Bass is good, and I think he's promising. He was a freshman last year, 4-star. I think he could be maybe the future option at that slot spot. So I think you could see him a little bit playing star against Troy, Pine Bluff, Kansas, Mississippi State. You could see him a little bit in some of those games. So I think he's my number 1 backup there. But again, the star spot, it is a niche role within the team, and it's a very specific role that's asked to do a lot of things. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of overlap with the safeties, with the linebackers sometimes. So it's a little interchangeable with some of these safety spots if you want to talk about that. Zach, who do you have as your starting safeties?
I've got big surprise here. Santana Banner, ranked third in team tackles last year. He had 59, above average run defense grade on PFF. He had 3 pass breakups. He's 6'3", 210, so great size. Definitely has a little bit more height than usual. Redshirt junior, so still will have another year after this, which means I don't think we've seen the best of Santana Banner, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. He's a guy that a lot of people have an eye on, another guy that could be a catalyst on this defensive group this year. Big guy this year. And that was the one that was like, okay, yes, he's going to start. Then there was some speculation. A lot of people have thought about Elijah Dotson. I went with Trajan Greco. He spent 2 seasons with Mizzou. He's played in every game. I think he's ready for the jump. I think the fact that he was still in the rotation every single game last year, he has tremendous speed. Yeah, he's a little bit smaller at 5'11", but I think you've got Banner, he's got the size. Maybe you can play around with that. I don't mind having Greco at 5'11" just because he has so much speed. So I went with him. He's just a junior. And then Elijah Dotson is my number 1 backup. He spent time at special teams and as DB in his freshman season at Michigan. He certainly has a chance to be in the starting role. I like that Greco has spent so much time in this system. So that's why I went with that. And then my other backup was Jaden McGregory. Great prospect, but I think they should utilize his red shirt and play him 4 games if possible.
And for the first time here, we've got all 4 the same.
Hey,
Here we go. Took to the last one over the offense. We were entirely the same here. We've got just the safeties room is the exact same. So yeah, I've got Banner and Greco as my starters, and I've got Dotson and McGregory as my top 2 backups. Obviously, yeah, Banner kind of emerged as the top guy in that safety room last year, which people certainly didn't expect. If you would have told me at the end of the year that Santana Banner was going to be the best of the bunch, I wouldn't have expected it. It looked like it was going to be Catalon and Burks for a while there. So Banner now kind of helming the newer version of the safety room, stepping up into a leadership role. He talked in spring ball a little bit about the thing he wanted to improve upon the most was his eyes, trying not to let the quarterback read his eyes, and then trying to be a little more decisive on the field. I think Banner is only going to continue to grow. Last season was his first at the Power 5 level, making the jump from Northern Illinois. So now he's got familiarity with Euro and the platoon scheme. And I think it's going to be really cool to see him take a leap. I think there's a chance he takes a really big leap. He could be one of Mizzou's most improved players next year. Him, Darius Smith, Marquise Gracial, Rodriguez, all guys to watch. I think Banner could very well step up and do that kind of elite tier of safety. He's got the measurables for it. He's got the physicals, and he seems like he's taking on more of the leadership role, and he's working on those intangibles. And then Greco as a second starter, he kind of, to me, is like on the Jeremiah Beasley track for his respective position, except he's a year ahead. So now he's ready to be one of those starters. He played a lot last year in short spurts. Was pretty fine, pretty consistent. I think he's ready for the starting role. He's got the scheme familiarity part of it. He's got probably some chemistry with Santana Banner from playing with him last year. So that's stuff to work with. And then Dotson, I think he'll be a pretty regular guy to see on the field. Not necessarily a backup, more as a rotation. Last year, obviously, they rotated between Catalon, Burks, Banner, and then Greco a little bit, even Most Phillips a little bit. And part of the reason you do that is because Banner can go down in the box. When Banner goes down in the box, you can even that's where you might see a little more Dotson, a little more Greco. So I think Dotson is definitely going to see the field a little bit. Obviously, he's probably fully recovered from that torn labrum by now that he suffered back in spring. But I think he'll be ready to go for the regular season if I had to project. And he'll be an interesting guy to watch, play a little bit of corner too sometimes even maybe. But Dotson will be good. And then McGregory, he's definitely also one of those freshmen that could play really quickly, kind of joining that group of Overton and maybe even Jackson Gates. So McGregory is a guy to watch who I think will definitely see the field, probably preserve his red shirt like you mentioned with Gates. Because if you've got Greco and Dotson and and Banner playing at high levels. No need to burn that for just a fourth guy. So I think McGregory will be pretty interesting watch in limited action. You can maybe see where he's at in his first season. But yeah, I've got the same quartet as you here for my starters and backups and safety. I think it's a really interesting group. I think it's versatile. I think you'll see a lot of Banner, Greco, and Dotson, and the rest will kind of filter in where they can.
Yeah, without a doubt, it's a very interesting squad because I think this could be the start of something else. Like you could see Banner holding this spot again next year, which I think there was really a lack of this year with a lot of like big returning guys that had played a lot of starting minutes at Mizzou last year in the defensive group. Banner was a guy that played a lot of snaps, and obviously he ended up really getting into that rotation. But I think he'll just maybe be able to continue this and really become just a vocal veteran leader as the years go on. So really excited for this group.
Yeah, he'll be important for sure. I remember when the portal cycle was happening, and for a while there was no Chris Graves, and so you were looking at really just Banner, and it's like, he's like the only guy. But even then, you can kind of depend on him to an extent because it's like, all right, I think he's ready. He did it. He's played a lot. He's familiar with the scheme. He's mature. He's a leader. He's there. He's ready. And I think regardless, yeah, Banner's going to be a fun watch next year. So we'll go ahead and run through our starting lineups one more time. No need to talk about the backups, but we'll just run through so the viewers can see everything. I've got Darius Smith, Langdon Kitchen on the edge, Gracial, Jalen Marshall on the defensive line, Rodriguez and Robert Woodyard in my linebacker room, Chris Graves and Nick DeLoach. I'll go, Nick DeLoach is my CB2. Kensley Lewidor-Foston in the star, and Santana Banner and Trajan Greco on the safeties. Zach, if you want to run through yours real quick.
Yep, for my edges, I have Darius Smith, Kamaran Morgan. For my defensive tackles, Marquise Gracial, Jalen Marshall. Linebackers, Nick Rodriguez, Robert Woodyard. Looking at the cornerbacks, Chris Graves Jr., Sione Lole. And then at my star safety, Kensley Lewidor-Foston, and at my two safeties, Santana Banner and Trajan Greco.
All right, so we've got two differences in starters then between me picking DeLoach, you picking Laule, and then me picking Kitchen, you picking Morgan. I'm almost tempted to just flip both my picks to agree with you, but I think I'll stick by them for now just so we've got a little bit of disparity. Thank you all for watching. As usual, we've now got our offense and defense episode published. If you want to see our offensive depth chart, you can watch the episode from last week. We ran through that and our reasonings for everything there. But yeah, this was our defensive depth charts. Thank you guys for watching. And this is the All Things Mizzou podcast by KCSN.